There we go. I'll just open up the chat box as well before we get started. I'll give everyone a moment to come into the Zoom room. Before we get started, I'll also just take a moment to stream our discussion on Facebook. So we will begin very shortly. It usually just takes a few moments for the stream to go through. So we'll get that connected and ready to go. We'll be live in just a moment. Excellent. All right, so we are also live on Facebook, so more people can tune in as well. But I'd like to welcome everyone to this panel discussion of Links as Bone, Sorel Etrog, and the Fragile Body. My name is Sophie Hinch. I'm the Education and Public Programs Coordinator at the AGW, and I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in this evening. I'll start off with a brief agenda. I'll start off with a brief introduction, followed by our land acknowledgement. I'll introduce our moderator this evening, as well as our speakers. Then that will be followed by a discussion and a brief Q&A towards the end. So if you do have questions, do pop them in the Q&A box rather than in the chat. They're easier to keep track of, and we'll get to that later in the evening as well. So on the occasion of the exhibition Links as Bones, Sorel Etrog, and the Fragile Body, the AGW is proud to host a panel that explores the importance and enduring legacy of Sorel Etrog in Canadian art and culture. This topic will be addressed from a variety of perspectives with speakers including an art historian, a collector, the curator of the exhibition, and a family member. And I'd also like to thank our lead sponsor, the Morris and Beverly Baker Foundation, in memory of Morris D. Baker. And I'd also like to sincerely thank the Chloe Danilev Collection for their generous support of the accompanying publication. And if you are interested in owning one of the copies of the publications, they are available for sale. Or if you let us know in the chat where you are tuning in from, you'll be entered into a draw where you can win a copy of the publication as well. So do let us know, where are you tuning in from this evening, and you could win your very own publication. And again, thank you to the Chloe Danilev Collection for their generous support of this lovely publication. I got my hands on my copy and I can't wait to go through it as well. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we gather today. The Art Gallery of Windsor respectively acknowledges that we are located on Anishinaabe territory, the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And today, the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy are represented by Walpole Island First Nation. And we want to state our respect of the historical and ongoing authority of Walpole Island First Nation over its territory. And wherever you may be tuning in from this evening, we encourage you to do the same. Whose land are you on? I'll introduce our first speaker this evening, Jonathan Gendler. Jonathan Gendler is Sorel Etrog's nephew. Following Etrog's passing in 2014, Jonathan assumed the position of an executor of his estate. In 2015, Jonathan moved with his family to Canada and has lived near Toronto since. He is actively working to promote Etrog's legacy through museum and private gallery exhibitions, publications, and online presence. Aside from working as the estate's executor, Jonathan has had a long career as an executive in the semiconductor industry, and he also owns a music recording studio. Thank you for being here, Jonathan. I'd also like to introduce Joyce Siemens. Joyce is an art historian, curator, and cultural policy specialist who has taught at OCADU and York University, where she served as chair of visual arts, dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts, and director of the Schulich MBA program in Arts, Media, and Entertainment Management. She is a former director of the Canada Council for the Arts. Her art historical research focuses on 20th century Canadian art with a particular interest in the development of abstraction in Canada and the work of Canadian women artists. Her first review of Etrog's work was written in the early 1960s, and she has remained interested in his work since that time. She is the author of the 2008 Sorel Etrog Paintings and Drawings, 1963 to 1971. Thank you for being here, Joyce. I'd also like to introduce Andrew Danilev. Andrew is a Toronto-based collector and founder of the Chloe Danilev Collection, named after his daughter, with whom he shares a love of art. The collection focuses on Canadian and international works of all media, with a special emphasis on abstraction. Fine examples of works such as historical Canadian luminaries as Claude Toussaint, Jean-Paul Riopel, Tim Zuck, and Ray Mead hang alongside mid-career and emerging Canadian abstractionists such as Christian Eckhart, David Urban, and Jason Gringler, amongst others. Over the past decade, Danilev has developed a significant collection of the works of Sorel Etrog and has been committed to supporting Etrog's legacy. By participating in this panel, he offers a unique perspective on the transformative aspect of living with the artist's work and the deeply personal connections that arise from this dialogue. Thank you for being here, Andrew. And lastly, our moderator and curator of the exhibition, Dr. Alma Mikulinsky. Dr. Alma Mikulinsky is an art historian, curator, and cultural consultant with an international practice. As curator, she managed the world's second largest collection of Pablo Picasso's ceramics and curated exhibitions of modern and contemporary art in Asia, North and South America. She's also a sought-after author. Her writings have been commissioned by prestigious institutions such as the Tate Modern and Musée National Picasso Paris. Her latest book on Sorel Etrog was published by Art Canada Institute in 2020. So with that said, I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see all of the panelists and our moderator for this evening. And I will pass it over to Alma. If there are any questions from the audience, feel free to interact in the chat or drop them in the Q&A box. But I'm looking forward to this discussion. Thank you again, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, Sophie. And I have to say, in general, the experience of collaborating with the Art Gallery of Windsor has been exquisite. I'm deeply grateful for all the support and the conversations, the deep conversation that I had both with Julie and Jennifer throughout the process of bringing this exhibition to life. So thank you. I'm so honored and excited to moderate this panel today. The selection of 3 individuals whose relationship to Sorel's work is one that is both unique, as well as just truly offers different perspective on not only the artist, but also the man. One of the frustrations that I had working on this, well, first the book and then the exhibition, was just realizing that the fact that I never got to meet Sorel, even though now I consider, I refer to him in first name basis. I feel that I know him well, but having the opportunity to have conversations, both with Jonathan, who now I consider a deep friend, his family, and of course the people who knew and loved Sorel, those who live with his artwork and think about his artwork so deeply. It's a real treat to have the 3 of you tonight. I'm going to share my screen and give a little bit of context to what I'm looking to do today. So as Sophie mentioned, the idea is to talk about the importance and legacy of Sorel Etrog's work in Canadian art. For those of you who know or come from Windsor, there is no doubt about the very prominent presence of this artist in your city. And we can say that for many people all throughout Canada, Sorel's work is, it adorns the streets of many of our cities. Today, just, walking around Toronto, I came across 3 of his pieces, and you could say the same in many other places. And these 2 pieces, they're a very quick walking distance from the Art Gallery of Windsor. The exhibition, on the other hand, is focusing. I received an invitation in 2019 to curate an exhibition from the collection of the Art Gallery of Windsor. The collection was a gift from the artist in 2002 and is largely based on the artist's graphic work. It was a unique opportunity, I felt, to show an aspect that is lesser known aspect of this incredible, deeply talented artist. And with strategic loans from the Sorel Etrog estate, I've curated Links's Bones, Sorel Etrog and the Fragile Body. The starting point for this exhibition, as well as the starting point for this conversation, is a biographical, deeply personal event in the artist's life. In the preliminary conversation that we had for this panel, we all admitted that Sorel Etrog's art, while deeply intellectual and cerebral, is also one that functions in a deeply personal way for all of us. And it has a deeply emotional impact, at least for us as viewers, be it as people who knew the artist, as family, as friends, people who admire the work, learn how the artwork changes as you spend more time with it. The starting point of this exhibition was a car accident, that a grave car accident that Sorel Etrog had in 1967 while he was living in Italy. It was a bit of a discovery. I want to give a note to the Art Gallery of Ontario, which housed the archive of Sorel Etrog. And I saw in the audience today also Amy from the library and archives of the Art Gallery of Ontario, that basically opened their spaces for me for many, many, many hours of research. As I was doing this research, I came across this interesting photograph. And as I was looking into it more and more, I was also able to find some letters that describe what was a life-threatening car accident. I found this letter that Sorel wrote, where he described, right straight from the hospital, you should have seen the shaky handwriting. And Sorel there wrote, "I am numb. I can't really believe how it happened. And yet here I am in a hospital with both feet in plaster and a finger broken, and my back is full of pain. To my great luck, Lika, his fiancée and future wife, is feeling fine. She just left the hospital and came out with only a few cuts. Picture to my consultation, if I had also had the bad conscience to have damaged somebody else as well." So as I was starting to think about Sorel Etrog's art at this moment, which I have to say was a high point of his career, I've started to recognize a change stylistically in his artwork, one that I recognize as this notion of his link style began to transform visually into something that appears to be more exploring questions of the body and its fragility. And from this deeply biographical point came also this moment of great questioning of what does it mean to be an artist, the possibility of ever sculpting again. And this is something that I will also explore later in this panel with our speakers. But from this very biographical, personal point of view, I wanted to start by welcoming Andrew to our panel. First of all, Andrew, if you can unmute yourself. Hi. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you, Andrew, for joining us today at this moment where our collective eyes are looking towards Europe, and specifically the Ukraine, with much heartache and disbelief. Thank you as a prominent member of the Canadian-Ukrainian community for being here today, making the time to talk about art. I just wanted to ask you, I remember some beautiful conversations that we had in the past, and I just wanted to ask, from your point of view, how does the work of Sorel Etrog resonate for you? What is it that you so deeply connect to in the sculpture work?
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for being here, everybody on the panel. And thank you to the Art Gallery of Windsor, sincerely, to have done this amazing work and put this amazing project together. And it's a real privilege and honor for me to be invited to be a part of it. So thank you all for everything. Alma, to get to your question, because I know we don't have a lot of time, and I could carry on for, oh, that's not good. Okay, sorry, are we?
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. You know, I love that question. I love the fact of having to contemplate that question in sort of a more formal setting and to give a more formal sort of reasoned answer. What I wanted to start with saying is that you know, you just mentioned about Ukraine and my Ukrainian background, and you know that I was gonna still participate in this panel, given the fact that I'm always not feeling so cheery and happy. But life also must go on, and something that my cousin Oksana, who told me she managed to leave her home in Lviv and get to Poland with her two little kids, and we were chatting about what she was going through, and one of the things she mentioned to me, her grandfather was a very prominent Ukrainian artist, and he has a whole studio of work in the city of Lviv. And when she said to me, "Oh, what am I going to do with Guido's work?" And it really struck me that as all of this damage is being done to these people, not just physical damage, material damage, but also the essence of the people, and a lot of that is expressed, as we all know, through the arts. So I'm very glad to be here and very glad to answer these questions. And part of what that relates to what the connection I feel with Sorel's work. So I'm going to answer your question now. So I first just generally became interested in I've always been interested in abstract art, and originally it was my experience I had at Georges Pompidou, seeing a Giacometti sculpture for the first time. And for some reason, that very tall, skinny bronze of the human body kind of really struck me. And it just sort of, it was the first time where I thought, wow, sculpture is so powerful and so strong and has such a real communicative value. Not that other visual arts don't, but it was that sort of first experience. And when I was starting to get involved in art in Toronto here, starting to learn about Canadian artists, I found this artist called Sorel Etrog. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I started following him. And fortunately, I had the great pleasure of meeting my great friend, Barbara Edwards, who you all know. And ultimately, I was introduced to through her work with Jonathan in a more meaningful way to the work of Sorel Etrog. And it's been a real wonderful experience for me personally and for my family. And one of the things I wanted to say from the outset here is, and I kind of scribbled this down earlier today, so it sounds like I'm reading, which I am, but I'll chat more about it afterwards. He said, I say his work transmits a sense of his personal history, life experiences, and challenges. In my experience with his works, I feel a strong sense of understanding and empathy for the basic elements and forms and principles of humanity that Etrog uses in his expression of the things that he as a person held most important. And in that sense, you know, when you ask about my connection with Sorel and working and living with his work around me, it surrounds me in my office, which I think many of you have seen. You know, it's the best way I can describe it is that art for me is a language, and that not only relates the experiences of Sorel Etrog through his life and through you know his childhood and leaving and starting life again somewhere else and creating. You know, it's like an access point for me to also share, you know, my life experiences and you know my perspectives and my beliefs about things and the way I think about things and so in that way, it's I describe it in myself, you know, in my own thoughts as this conversation, this and just happens to be through the medium of abstract art. So it's a real, it's fun. It's something that gives you an intellectual flexibility also. And oh, that's a beautiful piece. I love that piece.
Such a beautiful piece. I can deeply relate to what you're saying. I often thought about sort of my academic intellectual pursuits as being just that, deeply intellectual. But the research on Sorel Etrog's work brought me very closely with my family history. When you look at a man who has, as you said, lived in one place and with the impact of war found himself having to relocate once, then yet again, eventually for reasons of basically making a home for himself. And the way in which his art, and I think this is something that Joyce will touch upon, the way in which his art reveals these very traumatic incidents of his life, but in sort of like hiding and revealing and concealing, I guess, those meaningful experiences that he had as a child. I feel that it, at least to me, it was an incredible opening of both understanding a little bit who I am, why I am, where my family is from. And I think this is one of the incredible things when you talk about the connection, not being only a language, but rather the ability to transmit that. This is something that I feel that, yeah, deeply unique about the experience that you're describing, something that is very telling about Sorel Etrog's work.
Well, just, you know, I want to, I'm not sure, I just want to relay one thing in terms of what you just said. And I'm very fortunate to have in my life and in my family's life a work of his called Embrace, and maybe even a study for it also. But you know, to sort of bring together what you just said and sort of what I said earlier, like I think about that piece first. When I think about that piece and when I first saw that piece, it was around the time that our daughter was born, Chloe, and like I saw this and I just thought to myself, wow, that's just, you know, that's just like me holding my daughter, you know, embracing my daughter, which is obviously a very you know, very special thing. But then, you know, in light of what's been happening lately too, and stuff we see on images on the news, and, you know, every time, you know, you see someone in distress, you oftentimes see someone holding them, you know, whether they're holding a child or whether they're like a worker is holding them or a family member is holding them, you know. So that very simple, like an embrace is such a simple thing. It's just like,
Yeah, it's so powerful.
It's you know,
And the materiality, yeah.
Yeah, but you can also let yourself, and I think that's the good thing to further to what you're saying about Sorel's work. I think he makes those things accessible, easily accessible, in a sense that you can,
in material form as well.
but it lets you participate, right? It's like, okay, well, you know, like the Embrace, perfect example. You know, he felt this, he went through this, whatever came to inform that particular image or that particular, why he chose that name, or why. That's like, it gives you just an opportunity to connect your own experiences in your own life to it, and that's what I love about his work. It like that, I can say that about every piece of his. Like there's just something that lets you be a part of something that's a lot larger. And I scribbled down here another phrase, just, you know, be part of a larger conversation. I think that's one of the really special things about art, and especially you know, being so, for myself, being so particularly attuned to Sorel's you know, vision and really his ideas and his, you know, like it's like everything you buy in. When something interests you, you accept all of it, all that went to make it, you know. So
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I would love to. Jonathan, do you want to? I was about to invite Joyce.
I know, but I just wanted to just say a few words about this last thing that you mentioned and that Andrew was talking about, and especially when we're looking at the sculpture that's right now in front of us. So, you know, we've discussed so many times about Sorel's background and, you know, being a child of war and growing up during World War II and all the horrors that he was going through as a child. And one thing that we should mention is that he was quite obsessed with the subject matters that had to do with a mother and child and parents. And I personally think that even these king and queen sculptures, and by the way, there are quite a few king and queen sculptures. One is the one that's in Windsor. One is the one that we see right now in front of us, and there are more. And then another subject matter that repeated many times in his sculptural career is mother and child, which also repeat a lot of times, and the embraces, and there are quite a few embraces in his oeuvre. These are all, I think, these all represent the basic anxiety that he had as a child and as a teenager and the fear of abandonment because of the situation he grew up through. So yeah, I just wanted to mention this as something that was very deep in his creation. And one more thing is that, and again relating to the subjects that you were discussing with Andrew, is that even though Sorel was very much like you described it as cerebral, and he was very aware of everything, every little detail, he was very much in control when he was painting or sculpting. Still, of course, I mean, his subconscious was probably pouring through, and even though he was trying to control it, there are things that he couldn't control and just went out and went through. And I think that this is the reason that we, and I believe that so many other people, feel such an emotional connection to his sculptural work, because it's not only, I mean, on the outside, yes, they're very polished and very detailed and very accurate, but there's something very strong beneath that really communicates with our subconscious.
I think this will be a perfect moment to ask Joyce to unmute and join us. Joyce was, I mean, a lot of the scholarship around Sorel Etrog's work was one that focused more on the intellectual elements, his relationship to the history of art. Joyce, I believe, due to her privileged position as a close friend of the artist, was the first art historian to also be able to see those elements that now Jonathan is saying, of course, they're essential to the art making. Of course, it is an inevitable part. His childhood, his trauma, his experiences, himself as a human being. So I think, Joyce, if you could perhaps reflect on some of the things that were said.
I would like to very much. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. So I first got to know Sorel's work in 1963 when Canadian Art asked me to do a review of a sculpture exhibition. And that sculpture exhibition was pre all the work that we've been talking about, really magnificent work. And I'll just quote from what I wrote then. The bronzes possess a spiritual independence and magnificent. Toronto should be honored that this talented and exciting young artist will soon make his home in this city. And from that time on, I followed Sorel's work with great interest. And I had the privilege of attending a performance piece that he did that we'll look at in a moment, and writing a catalog essay for an exhibition on his two-dimensional works that was held at Simon Fraser University. And I had the enormous privilege of getting to know Sorel, particularly, I have to say, in the latter part of his life, when the trauma that he had experienced was significantly more evident in the work than it had been earlier. And so what I would like to do in this brief moment is just take some of Sorel's poetry, because his writing often reflects the inner sensibility that drove him to work, to make those sculptures that we've been talking about. So I have on the screen now the piece that's in front of Hart House at the University of Toronto. It's a huge monumental piece. It's called Survivors Are Not Heroes. And even the title, the provocative title, has to do with everything we're living through today and everything he lived through. What does it mean to survive in the face of horrible situations? And so he wrote, art, and remember, we're looking at a period where he has been working with the links and the hinges and looking at different ways in which the body parts, as Alma has examined, and I want to say congratulations to you, Alma, on an exquisite show. And to those who helped with the catalog, it is terrific. It captures Sorel's sensibility. And I also want to put in another plug to say that if people in the audience want to know more about Sorel, the go-to place is the Art Canada Institute online publication by Alma of Sorel's work. It's a total overview of the work. It's terrific. And so I'm putting in a plug because if you want to know more about Sorel, that's where you go, okay? So let's read this together. Art linked to life, art linked to death, temporary witnesses linked to one another, linked to the past, linked to the unknown. And Andrew talked about the way in which he became or has become engaged and participates in the work. And this will come out throughout. This is what Sorel wanted. He wanted to engage his viewers in this sense of participation. Can we go to the next slide? So here was this marvelous occasion celebrating Samuel Beckett's birthday. And it was done in a warehouse space at a gallery on Spadina. And Sorel choreographed this. Veronica Tennant was supposed to dance it, but wasn't able to. She injured herself. He worked with the dancer, Gloria, and from the National Ballet, lost her last name. And he planned this out very carefully. But what you see in the center of this image is the dancer who started off wound up in layers and layers of cloth, and who then gradually frees herself, and it's the kite, it's the concept of Beckett's work. And Sorel writes, today, perhaps today is the day the kite just may take off anyways. And what that talks to me about is his ongoing anxiety about the ability to create. What would it be? What would it look like? And I, like Alma, have had the opportunity of spending hours and days going through drawers of drawings which show how these ideas evolve and how painful the process is. It's exploratory, it's revelatory, but on the other hand, you see the tortured process of seeing whether the work of art will come to be or whether it won't. Next slide, please. So this is an image, and I'd like you to look at it closely because it's hard to see, but it's an image of wooden slats with hands behind them. And it comes from Sorel's film. And it really is something that, except in this clip in the film and a clip in the book that came out of the film, there is no work that looks like this, but anyone looking at it today cannot but see, what we're witnessing every day in the news, what the experience must be like of being imprisoned behind bars, but these are not traditional prison bars. And now I'd like to go to the next slide. Okay, so this is an exhibition that I felt compelled to review. It was held in the Christopher Cutts Gallery, and it looked in most of the work like it was made of found objects out of boxes, and you can see spikes at the bottom and gas things that he found. He found them. He was working in the basement of the apartment house that he lived in, and I was there in that basement space that he had, and it was filled with garbage box pails and plastic boxes and frames. And the plastic boxes actually reminded me of, or remind me now of, the imagery that was in the Spiral film. But what he said, which seemed to me to speak not only to the fact that this exhibition, which looked at first glance, not necessarily this work, like it was abstract, I collect and select the unavoidable, and the bouquet of obsessions carries me day by day, and my obsession grows like the wildflowers in the field. Nobody asks them to be there, but once they're there, they're inescapable to me. Once they're there, they belong to you, Andrew, and all of us who are, by process of engaging with the work, engaged with the layering of meaning that is present in those works. And I did this because this is an aspect of Etrog's work and a layering that is not always evident of the suffering that he experienced in the process of creation. And I will only say that by the end of his life, he could no longer draw on a large scale. His hand was shaking. And I can't show you this, but I have a drawing that he gave me in 2009, doesn't matter, but his hand is shaking, but it's still a joyous drawing, and he is still working on it. And even to the last week of his life, he was doodling and drawing and writing notes to himself that would lead to further ideas, or would, he believed, even though he said he couldn't go on, he continued to look for that inspiration and to draw on it always. So he never stopped this tortuous creative process. I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Joyce. One of the many things I truly appreciate about your comments is also the fact that you brought to bear truly the multifaceted aspects of his creation So you presented poetry, of course, you presented sculpture, the composite, the film, just truly the complexity in which you work. And I also deeply appreciate the fact, the mentioning in regards to the prominent role the drawing had in Sorel Etrog's work. Jonathan, I was wondering if you can unmute and perhaps also share some of your experiences and memories of your uncle. And specifically in the context, again, the general knowledge of Sorel Etrog's work is always one that is associated with sculpture. I was wondering if you can shed a little bit of light to the place of drawing and painting in his artwork, which is the core of the exhibition.
Yes, of course. I'd like to focus on drawing, because drawing was, for Sorel, drawing was his way to express himself. I always thought of Sorel as, Sorel's drawing hand was in a way an extension of his brain. And while many of us express ideas through a spoken language, Sorel always expresses ideas through drawing, and it was everything. I mean, it was his artwork, which was always started as a these doodles and drawings, like Joyce mentioned them, but also everything else. I mean, his birthday cards, for example, that he would fax to us every time we had a birthday, were also kinds of small drawings. And I've actually seen the same things at one of his close friends and also collectors, Al Green. Always at Al's birthday, Sorel would send him one of these doodles or birthday cards, which were little drawings with a lot of humor, which is something that also was very typical of him. But the reason I say that I think his arm was, or his hand was, an extension of his brain is that my earliest memory of my uncle is always coming to visit us and sitting on the balcony with some drawing paper and a pencil, and that drawing pencil or drawing notebook, drawing paper or notebook and pencils and pens were something that he carried with him to every place that he went. This was his arsenal, if you want, and he kept on drawing almost all the time. I remember that I would wake up in the morning and he would sit there with a cup of coffee and drew. And then, when I would go to sleep and come to, when I was a child, kiss him good night, he would sit there on the balcony with a drawing paper and pencil and continue to draw. He was, every time he did not speak, he drew. And he would come, and again, many of these drawings were just his way of thinking out loud, or just thinking with himself, because he would also discard a lot of them. But these were also the basis on which later on he would build his work. And I think this exhibition, Alma, you included some amazing example of how an idea comes about through a drawing to a painting, a sculpture, and this full cycle. Well, we don't have the drawing here, but there were also numerous drawings here before. So if you can go back to the other slide that you were showing. No, the next one, the one with this one. So in this case, we can actually see how an idea is expressed in two different medias. And you're right that there was the other slide before, the one with the multi-heads. So here we can see, how raw ideas are, in this case, it's a painting, so it's a little more advanced than just drawing, but trust me, there were numerous drawings that were done before that. And if you look at the lower left part of that, you can see a few ideas of this reclining head or like a reclining profile. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see how this, no, not this one, yeah. You can see how this eventually he chose one variation and turn it into, again, a variety of artwork. So in this case, you can see a print, a sculpture, and there's also a painting which was not included in the exhibition, but a large scale painting of the same subject. So, but everything started from the drawing.
It was also my experience when I was researching at the Library and Archive of the Art Gallery of Ontario. Again, there are boxes and boxes and boxes of his drawings, and to try and sort of trace a moment in which you can recognize a doodle that would then become into a full-blown motif that would live through a print that would become a sculpture is something that was really at times it felt like a wild goose chase, because again, like the plethora of ideas that Sorel has expressed in his drawings, not everyone, as you said, some of them were to be discarded, whereas other ones would evolve into their own creation, or just at the process of sculpting itself, another variation would come to pass. But to me, like, his drawing is almost like the truest expression of his creativity, one that would live through poetry, through writing, through sculpting, of course, and others. I was wondering, there will be a moment in which I will unshare in a second, just because I would love to. So my thesis for this exhibition was, I guess, the prominent role or the impact of the car accident on his artistic creation. And I have in the show what I consider to be the hand wall. It's a whole section where this is a selection. There are many, many more of small scale drawings in which the artist painted and repainted these images of the hand. And the hand is never functional. It's always knotted, broken, dysfunctional. And I was wondering, Jonathan, if you perhaps could talk about that. Sort of, why do you think the harm to the hand was one that was so impactful?
So for everyone who knew Sorel knew that for Sorel, art was everything. It was like an absolute. Just as an anecdote, Sorel never had any possession of anything except his art. Every time he would make some money, he would go back and and reinvest his money into making more art and casting more sculptures, etc. So art for him was everything. Now you can imagine a relatively young artist who's at the actually his career was just taking off. It was like a meteor, and all of a sudden he was injured in a way that for him was he did not know if he'd be able to go back to creating art the way he did before. In the beginning, his legs were injured, but it was mostly his hand, well, as a joke, his middle finger that was injured in a way that, by the way, left him crippled for the rest of his life. His middle finger never recovered. But in the beginning, the injury was severe, and he had gone through several surgeries to try and regain a function of his hand and his finger. And doctors could not assure him that he'd be able to go back to using his hand the way he did before. And for him, this was an existential crisis, because if art was everything for him, and the notion of not being able to come back to creating art was for him a threat that he just couldn't cope with. And people might think that this was just a small car accident, and people go through car accidents all the time, and he wasn't left crippled or worse than that in a major way. But I think that we spoke about the trauma of that he lived through or grew up through, and I think that every small trauma eventually played a part in like bringing him back to the traumas of his childhood. So he would kind of amplify everything. So for him, every little trauma like this immediately amplified to being something very, very big. And coming back to the period that Joyce was speaking about, the 2000s and on, where his health prevented him from continuing to create art in a way that he wanted. This was, if creation was torturous to him, then not being able to create was even more torturous. So he was miserable and deeply depressed because he could not create anymore. And that was at the end of his life. So I can only imagine, in 67, I was not conceived yet. So, but I can only imagine how, what deep influence this trauma had on him when it happened.
Yeah, and we can see, I mean, again, I mean, these individual portraits of hands, and I have to use the word portrait because each one has its own personality, appears to be expressing this sense of torture that you just described. I was deeply curious. I'm going to stop sharing for 1 second. And I was wondering, Joyce, appropriately, has behind her a sculpture of a hand, as well as, I believe, is it a print behind you, Joyce? Can you unmute? And yeah, just tell us about these works.
Well, the interesting thing about the hand is that if anyone is Jewish who's watching, they will know that the yad, or the hand, is a very important symbolic image. And it was for Sorel as well. So this hand has more meaning than just the physical hand. It's a representation of that symbolic hand. But in the background behind it, you see something a little bit different period than what Alma has been showing. Excuse me, I'm going to just take you over. I don't know if you can see it or not.
You need to move a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, hang on.
Yep.
But the point is that I wanted to say something that Marshall McLuhan wrote about Sorel and the, oh shoot, okay. Here.
Yeah, we can see it perfectly now.
There it is. Here. Okay.
Stunning.
Sorry. Sorry, my calendar just came up. But Marshall McLuhan wrote that if you remove the links from Sorel's images of the body, the connection is lost and the elements separate. So it gives you, I think, the kind of thing that you're dealing with, Alma, in all of these images, and what you said essentially, that the fact is that life is so fragile, and what that accident taught him or indicated to him that he lived with for the rest of his life was that all it needed was for that link, that joint to disappear. And so he did the series of dancers. And when you look at them, they're not just Danilev and dancers from the Danilev troupe, etc. It is about how dancers move and what those links and connections in the body provide, but also always that notion that the link or hinge can break and separate, and then it all falls apart. And it again, I think, is about that sense of the fragility, as you have
Absolutely
said, of life, and the fragility of circumstances that he lived with throughout his life.
Yeah, I think this is the underlying theme of my exhibition, and something that I feel that was truly highlighted currently at the Art Gallery of Windsor. There's a cycle of exhibition that deals with questions of, or with art that engages with question of disability and vulnerability. And I guess at the core of my exhibition is this notion of we're all abled bodies temporarily. I mean, disability is our, or, you know, the fragility of the body is all in our future. And realizing truly just how perhaps we might imagine ourselves and our bodies as capable and there for us, but yet the reality is that it's the other side of the coin, and it's an inevitable aspect. I've really appreciated the support. Again, Jennifer Matotek, the director of the Art Gallery of Windsor, was truly supportive of this approach. And for example, we've agreed that the hang of the painting will be one that is lower to also accommodate viewers who are not in a standing position, but rather in, so it hangs slightly lower than sort of the conventional of museum hang, in order to also accommodate this integration of the disability view into the exhibition, which I think is highly appropriate given the fact the theme of the show, it is what it is. Given the fact that we only have a few more minutes, I was wondering if there are any questions. I've seen one question from Mark around my book from the art gallery, from the Art Canada Institute. Yes, they've also printed hard copy, and I believe Jonathan simply reaching out to probably the art gallery, Art Canada Institute. Yeah, to purchase they're very beautiful books as well. Sophie, are there any questions from the audience?
I'll come back on the screen. I have to just give me a minute here. Show self view. There we are. I don't have any questions here, but I do have one that just came in the Q&A box from Howard asking, why did Sorel come to Canada?
Oh, that's a lovely story. But so Sorel Etrog immigrated with his family to Israel, where he as a young teen, and he studied art there. He received actually a scholarship to go and study in New York at the Brooklyn Museum of Art School. I probably messed the words. There is a lovely story, though, when he was again a very young man who already had one very successful exhibition in Israel of abstract, two-dimensional, I guess, between sort of collages that he created. And he went from gallery to gallery, attempting to find representation. And he lucked out. I see that Jonathan unmuted himself. Do you want to share the story about the Zacks? So he happened to walk into a gallery at the very same time that the well-known Canadian collector, Sam Zacks, happened to be there. And they connected right away, interestingly, with not a lot of English, just sort of a communication, I guess, perhaps through object, like Andrew told us. And Sam Zacks invited Sorel in the late 50s to come to Canada and basically offered him an invitation to work, offered him a studio and board. And from this initial connection started a connection with Canada. He was made a life for himself through this introduction. He was able to find gallery representation here. His first, Joyce, you mentioned the 63 exhibition. So that was, I believe, his second or perhaps third show in Toronto at the Gallery Moose. Yeah, Jonathan?
Yeah, so to complement the story, so first of all, you know, that the Zacks family had a great network here in Toronto. And one of the people that they were networked with were the Dunkelmans. And at that time, the Dunkelmans owned Tip Top Tailors, and they owned the building. But the top floor of the building was not used for their factory. So what Sam and Ayala, by the way, Zacks arranged was for the Dunkelmans to just give this floor away to Sorel to use as a studio with no rent. And Sorel just came from New York, where he had a very small and claustrophobic studio. And all of a sudden he had this huge space and he exploded. I mean, this was the period that he started creating his larger than life sculpture. And there's an amazing interview in which Sorel speaks about this and tells this story and how this finally enabled him to kind of, work on the things that he could only envision before and could never materialize. So this was one thing. The other coincidence, if you want to call it, is that around the same time that he came to Toronto, Gallery Moose was opened for the first time. So Moose opened his gallery, and he also was one of Sam Zacks' acquaintances. So Sorel so Sam introduced the two, and they immediately had great chemistry and loved each other. And ever since that day, Gallery Moose was Sorel's representative in Toronto until they actually closed down in the 90s. So these two things were kind of coincidental, but they were very influential in Sorel's decision to eventually make his home here in Toronto.
Was there something?
Oh, sorry, let me just add that the New York stop was not only important for studying at the School of the Brooklyn Museum and meeting Sam Zacks, but it was as I understand it, the first opportunity that he really saw African and Oceanic art, which became a significant influence on him. And when I would visit him in the later years, you know, his living, working space, the living room area there, was crowded with his books and papers, but all around were pieces that he had collected. And you can also see the influence of those works as well in the evolution of his work. After he comes to Toronto, starts working, as Jonathan has suggested, on the large scale in the studio space, or Alma did, that the Zacks provided him, and then the opportunity to move into Toronto, because that was outside of Toronto, to move into the Tip Top Taylor space.
Did you want to also share something?
Alma?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You know, Alma, I had a question that I thought might be, I know we're running out of time. I don't know how much time we have left, but I just wanted to throw it out there because I thought to kind of change the subject quickly, but you know, I think it would be helpful also for me to hear, you know, the connection between sort of the links and the hinges in his work, and sort of how, because those are two very you know, common sort of thematic imageries, and I just thought maybe someone can just for sort of completion of that, sort of for me also, just to answer that question.
Yeah, like Sorel was incredible in the fact, I mean, we talked about his incredible explosive creativity, but he actually worked quite in a delineated manner in styles. So Lynx was a style that he used. So he created this visual language that he then used for, of course, sculpture, painting, poetry, drawing, and so forth. And it lasted for about, I would say, 10 years, perhaps a little bit less. But the one that immediately followed it was the hinges. And it's so interesting because they're deeply related. I mean, Jonathan spoke eloquently about this, starting from your comment around the embrace. So Etrog's fascination with things that are connected and yet one that could always appear to be unravel is the core of his artwork. I mean, given the fact that you could move from one style to the other, or one artistic period and stylistic motifs, but yet at the essence, it's about elements that connect and can unravel at the same time. So hinges was the period that followed right after the links. My initial idea for the exhibition was one that to end with, again, a series of work from the Art Gallery of Windsor's collection that that started to use the hinges motif, but from, I guess, using the idiom, but with the same motifs that I explore throughout the exhibition. So you see how sort of the mood changes with the introduction of this new visual language. But Jonathan, am I right to say that he rarely looked back? That once he was done, perhaps a motif would continue, but a language, you could see a few transitional elements, but he would just keep on going.
Yes, let me go back just 1 second, because I wanted to add one more thing about the motif of the connection. And just very briefly, this is something that I think that, with the exception of the very last body of work, which are the composites, I think that you can see this linkage and interconnection in every period that he had. From the very beginning, what called the wood constructions, they're something like, you know, jigsaw puzzles. So the pieces, they look like pieces that are kind of interlocked together. And then the first sculpture period, which we dubbed as the biomorphic period, but still you can see a lot of elements that are intertwined together, locked together, linked together, even though he still did not come up with the physical link elements, but there are still images that are like the embrace, which is a great example of almost like two elements which are twisted together. Okay, and then of course the links There was another small, shorter period in between the links and the hinges, which is the screws and bolts. But again, elements of connection, of connectivity. Then the hinges, and right after the hinges, we had the period, again, shorter stint, which were the rivets. The famous king and queen on the bank of the river is from that period. So again, rivets are elements that connect pieces together. So this is something that definitely was the key element of Sorel's creation. So I think that he was creative in a way that he was looking for new ways of expressing, but he always came back to the same ideas. So to answer your question, Andrew, this is something that he just changed a little bit the language, but he always came back to the same principles. So moving from links to bolts, and then to hinges, and then to rivets, was something that just, reinventing the same, reinventing a language to speak the same ideas.
Is it an evolution, Jonathan? Is that what you're describing, something other than an evolution?
Yes, I think it's an evolution. But I think that if you look at the evolution, there's also a line that changes. Okay, so the later the work is, the less movement there is. So if you look at the biomorphic ones, yes, they're intertwined, they're linked together, but there's tons of movement. And then the links, some of them have more, some of them have less. Then you go to this, screws and bolts. When you see, some of the ones that you own from the hinges period, such as introvert, for example, there's almost no movement available anymore or possible anymore. It's very, very much locked in place. And then when you go to the rivets, there's no motion, almost no motion at all. So I think that if you go through his lifetime, you can see that the movement is getting more and more locked, more and more limited.
So just, okay, so to follow up, just maybe his notion of connectivity evolves. Would that be an accurate statement?
Or lack thereof. I mean, I feel, as Jonathan was talking, I was like, wow, this could be a topic of an exhibition in itself. Yeah, because it's not.
That Joyce was wanted to maybe let Joyce answer this last question.
Yeah, sure.
Please, Joyce, you're muted.
Just unmute yourself.
I was going to say that I think to a certain extent, we have to separate out the type of work that we're looking at. So in the figurative work, there's no question that there is this kind of evolution. It's not like it's not an evolution where it gets better or something like that. It changes as he experiments with different ways of doing things. And as I said, the constant experimentation is eminently obvious in the show you've done. But as I said, if you went to the AGO now and looked through the drawings, you would see that for any subject, there is this incredible, trajectory as he moves through different ways of working these figures and different ways of bringing them together and different ways of interjecting movement into or injecting movement into those activities. Whereas in the screws and bolts, etc., there's a static quality, a more solid quality, but also I think often a joyful quality, with the colored ones, etc., that has their own kind of movement or activity that is not about this tortured, hinge, and link period. And the other thing is that in the big sculptural pieces, not the biomorphic ones, but something like what everyone just saw earlier, Survivors Are Not Heroes, there's a different kind of movement, like an ascension, a movement upwards. And it's not about, again, the tortured links, it's about the capacity for, circles and different elements to come together, and then this vertical element that often crowns those works. And so there is a different type of movement. So I think we have to, look at the different forms and see how movement is interjected into them. But in the work that Alma has been dealing with, it's very clear that this sense of movement and constriction of movement and how movement occurs, against what barriers every movement happens. And so it's a different way of examining movement. A long answer to a short question, sorry.
Well, I think it's a great place for me to jump in and just to say thank you to Alma, Andrew, Joyce, and Jonathan for being here this evening. It was such an enlightening conversation. Thank you for being so generous with your stories and with your knowledge. We really appreciate you all being here. And I'll share my screen just once more before we say goodbye for the evening, just to say, let's keep this conversation going. You can come and visit us in person at the Art Gallery of Windsor and see the exhibition in person. You can also visit us online at agw.ca for additional resources, upcoming events. We have a podcast, virtual tours, workshops, meditation videos, art making videos, and more. So there's a lot happening at the gallery in person and online as well. So if you are interested in coming and visiting us, I highly recommend it. You can also purchase your very own copy of the publication. I dropped the email in the chat. I might put it one more time just in case, but you can reach out to our visitor services team to order your very own copy. I highly suggest it. It is a beautiful publication. With that said, I'll thank our panelists and our moderators once more. Thank you all for being here. And we hope to see you soon in Windsor. The exhibition is on until the end of April, so there's still time to come and visit us. But until then, take care, have a great night, and be well, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Goodbye.